Today we are going to be discussing the deaths of Nichol Olsen, Alexa Montez, and London Bribiescas. Nichol Olsen was born May 27, 1981 to her parents Rick Carl and McCheryl Olsen, and by all accounts, Nichol had a pretty rough time growing up. Nichol was an absolute daddy's girl when she was younger. Her dad worked for a construction company out of San Antonio, but when Nichol was only 7 years old, her father died of a heroin overdose just 2 days before Christmas in 1988. Of course, this absolutely devastated Nichol and her mother. After this, Nichol went on to describe her mother as a functional alcoholic who drank over the years to numb the pain from the loss of her husband. Nichol went on to become a young mother, giving birth to her first son, Skylar, when she was 15 years old. She dropped out of high school her junior year, later going on to obtain her GED. When she was 16 years old, she married Skylar's father, James, but they divorced a year later. By the time Nichol was 20 years old, her mother died unexpectedly the day after Christmas. Again, this was absolutely devastating. Her mother left behind Nichol's 13-year-old brother, so now she had the responsibility not only of taking care of her own baby, but her younger brother as well. At this time, Nichol just held a bunch of different low-paying jobs, just trying to make money and keep the food on the table for her son and her brother. Also around when she was 20 years old, she got married to another man named Carlos, and by 2002, their daughter Alexa was born. Carlos was a Marine, so the family had lived in Hawaii for a period of time before the couple got a divorce in 2006. That same year, she went on to get her cosmetology license and started working as a hairstylist. She really started to pick herself back up, and she started to flourish in her role as a mother. She admitted that she had a rough time when she was younger, which is absolutely understandable, but the more she got, the more she matured and learned how to take care of herself and her children. When she moved back to San Antonio, she met a man named Hector and went on to have another daughter named London in 2008. The two never got married, but shared custody of her when they broke up. So, at the time of her death, Skylar was 22 years old, Alexa was 16 years old, and London was 10 years old. Clearly, she had a very rough upbringing, but that didn't stop her from picking herself back up and becoming the best version of herself possible. Those who knew Nichol described her as being vivacious, energetic, and strong. She absolutely loved her job as a hairstylist. She was also working to build a watch and jewelry business called Kiva Decol with two close friends. She was absolutely beautiful and often attracted people by her looks, but she also attracted people by her positive energy and good vibe. One of her favorite things to do was to get together with family around the holidays for food, fun, and games. She was so proud to be a mother of 3, and her life revolved around her kids and building the best future for them that she could. Alexa Montez, Nichol's second oldest child but her oldest daughter, was a cheerleader at Clark High School and spent her free time volunteering at the local church. Her father described her as just being an awesome, very caring and giving person. He said that he heard people at her school tell him that she would literally give other people her own lunch money if they needed it. After high school, Alexa had plans to enroll in college at Texas A&M and wanted to study to become an obstetrician. Then we have 10-year-old London Bribiescas. She was a 5th grader at Leon Springs Elementary School. She was described by her dad as being vibrant, kind, and well-liked. She liked animals and singing, and someday wanted to audition for America's Got Talent. Her father said that London was his everything, and she was what fueled him to keep going. At the time, Nichol's son, Skylar, was out and living on his own. He was 22 years old, so he was just sort of doing his own thing. But Nichol and her 2 daughters lived with her boyfriend, Charlie Wheeler. So Nichol and Charlie met after he noticed her on Instagram and decided to send her a message and shoot his shot. They met for the first time in the summer of 2016. The day that they met, Nichol had a business meeting at the Locantora Resort, so she invited him over there to meet up with her. One of Nichol's friends and business partners, Vanessa, was also at the resort the day that Nichol and Charlie met. She said that Charlie was courteous, respectful, and self-assured. Charlie was 6 years younger than Nichol, and he definitely chased her down and made it very clear that he was interested in her from the get-go, according to Vanessa. At the time, Nichol had been divorced twice, as we know, but she'd also just gotten out of a relationship with another man who she had lived with for many years. But despite this, Charlie and Nichol's relationship took off very quickly. They seemed so happy together, and early on, Nichol even featured Charlie and herself in a promotional video for her jewelry brand. In the video, the couple looks so happy. They look like they're just in this wonderful honeymoon phase, cuddling, kissing, smiling, and looking deeply into each other's eyes. So now let's talk a little bit more about Charlie Wheeler, because his background is a pretty stark contrast to how Nichol grew up. Charlie grew up in Fredericksburg, Texas, in a nice home with married parents. He went to Fredericksburg High School for 2 years before his parents pulled him out to homeschool him. He then went on to Schreiner University, where he attended less than a year. He grew up in the world of rodeo, with his dad being a team roper and his mom being a horse trainer and barrel racer. So Charlie himself went on to compete in the rodeo for 3 years, starting when he was 18 years old. He then used his winnings from his time in the rodeo and started a security gate company called On the Go, but when he was 24 years old, he sold the company. By 2011, he started an oil field services company called OTG Services. By 2014, his company grew and he had 140 employees, but by late 2016, the company stopped operations. He then went on to work with his father on ranching, oil, and gas projects. I also want to note that within the past 10 or so years, he has had a few run-ins with the law. Most of these involved DUI, DWI, or public intoxication charges, but from what I've seen, I think the DUI charges were all dropped. He's also been pulled over many times for speeding. One time he was even going 74 miles per hour in a 45 zone. By April of 2017, Charlie purchased a 4,500 square foot, $1 million house in a gated community in Angua Springs Ranch in San Antonio. For the time being, Nichol and her 2 daughters lived in an apartment together, but after a few years of dating Charlie, Nichol, Alex, and London all moved in with him into his home. Alex and London lived in the home during the weekdays while staying with their fathers on the weekends. Together, they seemed like they were living a very luxurious lifestyle. In addition to this $1 million home, Charlie owned a Maserati and a Range Rover. Nichol was known to keep a very tidy, clean home. One of Nichol's friends went on to say that Nichol was just looking for a stable living situation and a stable relationship. That's what you look for when you get older, and that's exactly what Nichol seemed like she had and what she really wanted. By all accounts, the two seemed to have a great relationship, and it seemed like the perfect, stable relationship that she was longing for at first. Nichol and her daughters occasionally saw Charlie's family as well. They would go to his family's house for holidays, and they would attend Bible studies together. According to Charlie, him and his family let Nichol and the girls into their home and into their hearts. However, everything changed on the morning of January 10th, 2019. Now, according to Charlie, on the evening of January 9th, him and Nichol had gotten into a pretty big argument. Now, I don't know if this reason for the argument has ever been reported on. I couldn't find it anywhere. But apparently this argument was pretty bad because Charlie says that after this argument, he left the home at around 10 p.m. that night to go sleep at a relative's house. He said that that night he tried reaching out to Nichol and the girls multiple times, as well as other people, but they would not return his calls. He returned home the next morning, and what he walked into was an absolutely horrific scene. When he walked onto the second floor of his home, he found the bodies of 37-year-old Nichol, 16-year-old Alexa, and 10-year-old London all laying face down in the hallway, laying next to one another. Their bodies were found with pools of blood all around them, and there was blood smeared all over the floors and all over the walls. Of course, right away, Charlie dialed 911 and reported that there was a suicide in his home. Police arrived shortly after at around 9 a.m. Right away when they arrived, they saw Charlie on the front lawn of the home crying and acting hysterical. However, right away, police noted that he didn't appear to have any tears in his eyes or on his face. Upon entering the home and inspecting, police did find Nichol and her 2 daughters dead on the second floor of the home. Nichol was found with a single gunshot wound to her head. Alexa also died from a single gunshot wound to the head, while London died of a gunshot wound to her head and her neck. By the time police arrived on the scene, the bodies were cold and rigid to the touch. And next to Nichol's body, police noted there was a handgun on the floor. When police came back outside from inspecting the home, they saw Charlie across the street hugging someone. He was then placed in their patrol car and questioned, which is standard practice when someone is present at a crime scene. This is when he told police the story about him leaving that night after the two got into an argument. Again, he told police that all night he was trying to contact the 3 as well as others, but nobody would answer him. And I don't think it's been released ever who these other people were that he was trying to contact that he's talking about. Police then took his phone and his wallet, and he was transported to the police station for further questioning. But other than what I just stated now, I don't really know anything else about what he said to police about what happened. Of Of course, an autopsy was done on all three bodies, and the medical examiner ruled Alexa and London's deaths as homicides, while ruling Nichole's death as a suicide. They also determined that the two girls died before Nichol did. So the assumption here that they're making, and what they basically ruled, was that Nichol took the lives of her two young daughters before taking her own life. I will note, however, that the medical examiner has declined to make the full report or the results of the toxicology screen public because they said that releasing this information could interfere with the ongoing investigation. Obviously, this news devastated everybody who knew Nichol, Alexa, and London. Not only were they having to deal with the fact that they were all dead, but nobody around Nichol believed that she had the capability of taking the lives of herself and her children. She was making so many plans for her future. She had just enrolled London in singing classes, and she was excitingly expecting a visit from her son that weekend. Friends and family of Nichol say that she was so very proud of her daughters and who they were growing up to be. Her brother said that it's crazy for anybody to think that she could kill her two daughters. Bexar County Sheriff Javier Salazar announced that they are investigating the case, but stated that calling someone a murderer of their own children is the worst thing that you could ever accuse someone of. Everybody's so confused on what really happened. All people want to do is mourn the lives lost and remember them for all of the amazing people that they were. Alexa's boyfriend at the time made an absolutely heartbreaking post on Twitter about Alexa. He wrote, quote, "On January 10th, 2019, a part of me was taken. Through thick and thin, it was us against the world. Now I have to face this world alone. I know that you will be my guardian angel and guide me through it. Alexa Denise Montez, you will be my forever and always. I love you." Obviously, having to accept that a mother shot her two daughters and then herself is very difficult, and nobody would want to believe that Nichol is capable of any of this. But it's not just that it's simply hard to believe. There is some evidence that may point to all of this not being what it seems. It came out that 5 total phone calls were made from Nichol's phone the night that this happened. Apparently, the first phone call was made to Charlie's mother, who did not answer the phone. The remaining 4 calls were made to 911, but 3 of the calls were disconnected before the dispatcher could even answer. One of the calls was connected to a dispatcher, but Salazar has not released the details of this phone call. But they did say that these calls were too short for them to locate where the person was calling from. Salazar said, quote, "What we found was that while we did know that there was a disconnected phone call from that number, we don't know where that number is calling from, so all we know is that we have a drop call from that cell phone number. Normal protocols is to call that phone number back, but if we don't know exactly where the phone is located, then we don't know where to dispatch to. The way the system works was that it just was not engaged long enough for us to be able to attach a GPS positioning to that phone call." There was also more information that came out that led investigators to believe that she was getting ready to leave Charlie's house and maybe even start a new life with the girls just before their deaths. Investigators found an email on Nichol's computer that she got the day that they believe she died. This email was from the Grand Dominion Apartments about 6 miles away from Charlie's home. The email was basically sent to reach out to them to see how the apartment search was going, and also stated, "I have a 3-bedroom floor plan available that you loved for your move-in time frame." So beyond this, in terms of investigative information and confirmed information, that's pretty much all we have. I know that there's probably a ton of information going on behind the scenes that we just don't know about because this is still an ongoing case. But there have been some interviews with friends and others who knew Nichol that shed a bit of a light on how things were going with Charlie and Nichol's relationship. So one friend reported that in May of 2017, Nichol showed up for a video shoot for Cava de Cole, and she had a bruised eye, but she was trying to wear makeup to cover it up. She insisted to everybody who asked that she was fine. She said that yes, her and Charlie had gotten into an argument, but she would not go into further detail. Then another friend, Vanessa, who I briefly mentioned at the beginning of this video, recalled a day where Nichol and her were going to a Spurs game. As they were driving to the arena, Charlie called Nichol and asked to speak to Vanessa. He basically said to Vanessa that she's lucky that he's letting her go because he doesn't trust her. Vanessa sort of just played along with this because she was just happy at that point that Nichol was coming with. But either way, Nichol was absolutely humiliated by this phone call. Then, the same day after the game, Nichol and Vanessa went to a music club and restaurant called The Pearl. While they were there, Charlie started calling Nichol's phone over and over and over again. This was making Nichol visibly upset. Charlie found out her location and told her to come home right that second. She didn't even get to finish her drink before she had to get up and leave. Vanessa tried telling Nichol that this behavior is not normal. It's not okay, and it's emotional abuse. But despite this, Nichol left and went home anyways. Vanessa also recalls another time at their home that made her feel very uncomfortable. There was one time that Charlie became very, very, very upset because someone had dropped a pepperoni on the floor, and he went off and yelled at Nichol about it, saying that one of her daughters dropped it and ordered her to pick it up immediately. Then there was this other time that Vanessa was over and the TV's sound system wasn't working, and Charlie once again got really, really upset and just started blaming Nichole's daughters for all of the problems. Vanessa got the impression that Charlie was controlling and basically just told Nichol what to do. Vanessa flat out told Nichol that she doesn't like Charlie and she does not like the way that he treats her. But Nichol said that she's a guest in Charlie's house. It's his house, not hers, so she has to follow the rules. She assured Vanessa that everything was perfectly fine in her relationship, but all of these events made Vanessa so uncomfortable that she never went back to their house. Vanessa said that the longer their relationship continued, the more withdrawn she became. Her friends started saying a lot less of her, and she was becoming much more quiet. Vanessa said that it's not normal at all for Nichol to be shut down like that. She's normal, a very social, outgoing, and bubbly person, so this was very out of character for her. Then another friend named Monica recalls a different time in July of 2017 that Nichol and Charlie were at a hotel celebrating their 1-year anniversary in Galveston, Texas. At this hotel, I'm not sure exactly where in the hotel that they were, but they started arguing, and it seemed like it got pretty bad because Charlie was asked to leave the hotel. Charlie then started arguing with the security guards, who then escorted him up to their hotel room and told him to get his things before making him leave. Well, according to Monica, Charlie took all of his belongings as well as Nichole's belongings, including her cell phone, with him, just leaving her stranded by herself at this hotel in a weird city that she wasn't familiar with. And by weird, I mean weird to her, not that Galveston is a weird place, just that it's not normal for her. She hadn't really been there and she didn't know the area. So Nichol got a taxi over to Monica's house where she told her everything that just happened. She was crying and shaking, and she was so upset and embarrassed over the entire thing. Again, he literally just left her alone, stranded, all by herself with no care in the world. This was really disturbing that he did this. It clearly shows that he did not care what happened to her. He didn't have any regard for how she was going to get home or contact anybody. Clearly, he took her cell phone so that she didn't have any way to contact anybody. Not sure if he took her wallet as well. She probably had the wallet on her, now that I think of it. But clearly he did this out of spite, and he wanted to just make her life difficult. So she told Monica that she was going to break up with Charlie, but as so many people in these situations do, she got back together with Charlie as soon as she got back to San Antonio. So these are the different accounts told by Nichole's friends. I don't think that they've ever been necessarily confirmed by police, but they do show a very concerning pattern for Nichol and Charlie's relationship. These stories seem so specific that it's hard to believe that somebody could just make something like this up. The FBI has gotten involved in this case, and they've said that they have so many questions that they need to be answered before they can just call Nichol a murderer. She's not alive to defend herself. Neither are her daughters. She's not alive to say what was really going on or what really happened, so I think it's great that law enforcement and everybody in this case is not just jumping the gun to calling her a murderer, because again, she's not there to defend herself, and it's easy for so many people to just be like, oh, well, obviously this is what happened, and throw the word murderer around and just say that she murdered her children. So I'm really glad that they aren't doing that in this case. So a nonprofit called Project Absentees got involved with the case to help out with the investigation. This nonprofit was created by retired FBI agents to create a bridge between families like Nichole's and law enforcement. They said that they feel like something can be gained from them looking into the evidence, and Sheriff Salazar, who's in charge of the case, said that he agrees and that he would love to see if there's anything new that they can shed a light on in the investigation. One of these retired FBI agents, Taletta Copeland, said, quote, "In my 17 years experience as an FBI agent, there are some questions that need to be answered. There's evidence that needs to be collected before Nichol is ever called the murderer. I can't tell you passionately enough, Nichol, in my opinion, is not a murderer. I will go on record saying that she's not a murderer, and there's evidence out there that needs to be further analyzed before this case is closed. So just hearing that shows me that there must be so much evidence that we just don't know about, so many things that they are looking into that shows that this isn't all that it seems, and that Nichol did not take the lives of her 2 children. Police also came out and said that figuring out the GPS data in Charlie's car and his activity on his cell phone is going to be a huge step in solving this case. They said that they're not just looking into the cell phone pings, but into geofencing. They want to know when a certain app is used at a certain time. For example, if someone is using Google Maps at a certain time, they would like to know where and when. Again, the reason they want this is because they want to piece together who was where on the night that this happened. If they found out that maybe he wasn't at home or that he was at home, that can tell a huge difference, obviously, as to what really may have happened. However, Sheriff Salazar has also come out and said that at this time, Charlie Wheeler is not a suspect. He's just a person of interest. But there's also several other persons of interest at this time. Charlie is being represented by 3 lawyers who came out to the public and asked them not to jump to conclusions. They said that they think that it's regrettable that this young man is being demonized. They said that he's not a violent criminal and has no violent record whatsoever. I also do want to be fair in this case, and there have been people who have come out and spoken in support of Charlie and said that their relationship wasn't actually as bad as Nichol's friends are making it out to be. I do want to say that, of course, her friends are going to come to bat for her. Not that I don't believe them, because honestly, I do, and I'm just going to come out right and say that, and that I do believe that, but at the same time, you have to understand that supporters of their friend or their family who don't want to believe that she was capable of this, of course they're going to say that she's a good person and that their relationship was really bad, and they're going to be really focused on these red flags that they saw. Again, not in any way am I saying that I don't believe them, because again, I do, but I do just want to put that out there. Charlie's mother has come out and said that Charlie is absolutely crushed by the shootings. She said that he is grieving, and people seeing him as a suspect is just adding to the grief that they're facing. She said that he loved Nichol and that he loved those girls. His mother said, quote, "There's no way that we even saw this coming at all. My son is heartbreaking, and he can't even mourn. He can't do anything because he's got a target on his back." A lot of Charlie's friends have also come out to say that he's a really good guy. He loved those girls, and he would never hurt them. I will say that maybe I'm missing something, but these obviously are a lot more of generalized statements than what we heard from Nichol's friends, so I just wanted to point that out. It's a lot easier to say that someone is a good person generally, and oh, he loved the girls, and oh, you know, he had a great life and they had a great relationship, than to come out with very specific details about things that have happened and about their relationship like Nichol's friends had. Again, it's harder to come up with a lie, like an extravagant lie about this whole situation just to put a target on his back than it is to say, oh, he's a good person. Everyone thinks that their friends and families are good people, so I do just want to come out and say that. Not saying that they're wrong, not saying that Charlie is not a good person, but I'm just saying it's a lot easier to be like, oh, yeah, my friend, he's a great guy, than it is to come up with this huge story about something that happened that made you very concerned. Now, I do want to mention that according to the fathers of Alexa and London, Charlie has never once reached out to them to give his condolences. In fact, no one in the Wheeler family attended the visitation or memorial services that they had for Nichol and the girls. But then on the other hand, Charlie's lawyer came out and said that Alexa's father actually wrote him a letter telling him not to attend because for obvious reasons. So there's a gray area with that. Again, my thoughts, I think it's understandable if he doesn't necessarily go, especially if he was asked not to. Obviously, he doesn't want to create any more waves. He doesn't want to create any more drama in this entire situation. So I can see why he wouldn't be going to these things, especially if her family already suspects him of being involved. It's better to just stay away and let them grieve and let them deal with it if he isn't involved, obviously. If he is involved, there's a whole nother, side to that. But that's just my thoughts on that. I don't think him not going to those things, especially if he truly was asked not to, I don't think that in and of itself points to his guilt. So there are a lot of thoughts around this case and how this entire thing could have happened. I don't want to believe that Nichol is capable of killing her daughters or herself, but I do want to be fair in this case, like I said multiple times, so I do want to talk about a couple of things that are a little bit concerning in relation to Nichol. Again, she's deceased, she can't defend herself, but everybody has their baggage. Everybody has, things that they've done that maybe they regret. So I'm not talking about it for any other reason other than to just sort of put more information to this case and make things make sense. So Nichol did have a little bit of a history of domestic violence. In 2014, she was living with her then boyfriend when she was arrested on suspicion of misdemeanor assault. According to Nichol, the two had been fighting when he dragged her out of the house. At the time of this report, when she was talking to police, she did appear pretty intoxicated, but she wasn't acting erratically or out of line. When speaking with police, she said that she was upset because she was out and she called her boyfriend and asked him for a ride, but he said no. When she got home and looked at his phone though, she saw that he was talking to another woman. So she struck him in the face with an open hand. She did admit to the officer that she hit him first. When police looked at the boyfriend, he did have a bruise on his left eye and he had an abrasion on his knee. He told the officer that he tackled Nichol to the ground because she kept hitting him. A year later, however, the assault charge was dropped because of the boyfriend's lack of cooperation with police and the investigation. So as we can see, she had a little bit of a side to her that lost her temper sometimes, and maybe things got a bit out of control. But I will say, we don't know the full story here, and obviously the charges were dropped for a reason, so just keep that in mind as well. By no means does that mean that she had any sort of temper against her two girls. I will say that there's never been anything in connection with her girls that says that she's neglectful or abusive, and I know there's been some things that actually came out when she was a lot younger, when she was around 16 years old or a little bit older when she was a new mom. But after that, in her adult life, at least for 10 years before she died, nothing has ever come out about her, either from friends or families or reports saying that she had any sort of temper or had any negative things being done against her children. And other than this, I haven't seen any other reports of domestic abuse or anything like that against another boyfriend or anything like that. Again, I'm not trying to defend Nichol. Obviously, it's not okay to hit anybody. It's not okay to be involved in domestic abuse and being the abuser. But we don't know the full story, and maybe I'm giving a little bit too much credit for her, but we don't know what the boyfriend had done to her. We don't know if he had a history of him being violent towards her or cheating or whatever. It very well could have been that Nichol just lost her temper and smacked him, and that's as simple as that she lost her temper and that everything was her fault. Again, I know I'm kind of rambling, but I don't want anyone in the comments saying that I'm giving her too much credit or that, I'm not taking this seriously, because it is serious. But again, the reason I'm talking about it is just sort of to piece this entire thing together. So, that being said, I understand that if Nichol and Charlie had gotten into an argument, that maybe she could have spun out of control and did something horrific to Charlie. But to me, it literally makes no sense that she would target her girls. Now, if we're talking in terms of theories and how this entire situation could have happened, the only thing to me that could come close to explaining Nichol wanting to take the lives of her daughter is if she genuinely felt that she had no way to escape the abuse from Charlie, so she took the lives of her daughters and her own to sort of protect them and herself. But that doesn't really hold much water to me either, because she was building a business, and as far as I've seen, she continued working as a hairstylist when living with Charlie, so she was making money. It's not like she quit her job and just gave up her life to start living with Charlie. She was still working and being independent and building her own business. So her feeling trapped in his home with no way out doesn't really make sense for this situation. Also, both Alexa and London's fathers were both very involved in their lives, so honestly, she could have had them stay with their dads if really there was nowhere else for them to go. Now, again, just to be fair and see both sides of this situation, I will say that we don't know a lot about Nichol's relationship with their fathers. Maybe she was afraid to tell them because she was afraid that they would try to get full custody of them and take them away from her, so she didn't want to lose them that way by telling them that something was going on. So again, I will say that we don't know the situation. If, she was so afraid, like, if I tell the father of my children that there's abuse going on, they're not going to want them to return back to me. They're not going to want them around me anymore. So I can definitely see that if she didn't want to tell them, that would be why. But again, she loved her daughters. She wanted what was best for them, and I couldn't see her choosing to take their lives over just losing them by sending them with their fathers. Plus, again, we know that she was looking at apartments. She had somewhere to go. She may have even been planning to go there, so I don't see why she would make this permanent decision when she had a way out and she had plans for a way out. The other thought that I had is that maybe if Charlie had convinced her that her daughters are causing all of these problems, We know from Vanessa that he would constantly blame her daughters for very minor things and then blow it out of proportion. Maybe she felt so strongly that even if they left, that he was going to find them and hurt them, and she wanted to stop that from happening. I don't really know. Even just saying this out loud is making me doubt it, and it just doesn't feel right, and it just doesn't really make sense. I do want to note that in the wrongful death suit filed by London's dad, he states that Charlie is responsible for the entire thing because he left the house after the argument, leaving his gun there, knowing that Nichol was in a very emotional and panicked state. So basically in this suit, he's admitting that she's the one who took the lives of her daughter and herself. Basically just saying that he's responsible because he left her alone in this emotional and not mentally stable state. I don't know if I believe that he believes that this is really what happened, or if he's trying to file this wrongful death suit to get more information out of Charlie, because Charlie has not really spoken to anybody. He won't share any information, so to me, just from what I've gathered, it kind of seems like he's more so just trying to get more information out of him in a courtroom where, he can't lie, rather than him actually believing that she took her own life and her daughter's lives. I think that they just think that they need to do something to find answers from Charlie. So the other theory in this case, of course, is that Charlie is responsible. I think that these 911 calls that were made and dropped and the interviews from Nichole's friends all make this a very strong possibility. And in addition to that, I think the fact that she was literally looking at apartments to move soon is too much of a coincidence to ignore. I think that if he found out that she was planning to move out, that he may have felt that he was starting to lose control, and maybe he acted out of anger. I think that it's possible that he wanted to stop them from leaving because he wanted the ultimate control over them. I think that this makes sense given that he has this history of blowing up and blaming the girls for things. Maybe he just wanted to control them and mold them into who he wanted them to be, the perfect people for him, and once he realized that he was losing control, he took his anger out on all of them. Or maybe he could tell that Nichol was pulling away, or maybe this argument was because Nichol broke up with them, and maybe he blamed her daughters for their relationship failing. There's any number of reasons why Charlie could have wanted to harm the girls, but I think control is a huge factor. It's not a case of a couple who is married and has kids together and the man wants out of the relationship because he's cheating and he just doesn't want this life anymore. Obviously, that's a case that we see far too often, but I don't think that that's what's happening here. She could have moved herself out and took the girls with her if he didn't want them there. He had no strings attached. He didn't have to pay child support. He didn't have to pay alimony. There was nothing that he was going to be responsible for if she left. The only thing that makes sense to me of why he would want to get rid of them in this way is control. If I can't have you and you're not going to listen to me, then no one can have you. I do think that it's telling that he himself said that they had this argument before she left. Usually, at least to me, that's a pretty big red flag indicating that something went wrong. Normally when someone tells a lie, there's a little bit of truth to it, and it's sort of creating the lie around this small truth. So I do think there was a fight that night, and maybe something more happened. Another thought that comes to mind is maybe he didn't necessarily want to kill the girls. But think about it. Who are really the only people who can give information about what was really going on in Nichol and Charlie's relationship? Nichol and the two girls. If he wanted to kill Nichol, he knows that the girls could have told police that he was abusive or shed light on anything else that was going on into that house. Even if he did it at a time that the girls weren't home and wouldn't witness anything or hear anything, they can still talk to police about his behaviors and his demeanor in that house throughout the relationship. I just want to say, I think it's much more credible if the girls came forward to police and told them that he was abusive than her friends. Do I believe the friends? Again, yes, but they only got a snapshot of the relationship. If I want to be fair to Charlie and give him the benefit of the doubt, we can say that maybe they just had a rough spot. Maybe they were having a couple of really hard days when the other friends saw them and they made up and everything was fine. Maybe it wasn't this bad all the time. Maybe they were going through things that were really stressful and they were acting in ways that just weren't normal and weren't representative of their relationship. I know that me and my boyfriend have had moments where we're arguing in front of my friends and it's really uncomfortable for everybody else, but I know that it's just in that moment that, something's going on, something's stressful, and we're not acting in a way that's normal. I know that I've seen my friends in their relationships argue or say something snarky or just act in a way that made me a little bit uncomfortable, but I know, again, that they're going through something, that, they're moving or they're starting a new job or just something really stressful that isn't indicative of their overall relationship. So again, your friends don't really get a full picture of your relationship and everything else that's going on unless they live with you. But who would know about their day-to-day lives and everything that happened all the time? Alexa and London. So not to discredit the friends at all, but I do think that it's just more credible if the girls were to say something. I mean, I am more inclined to say that I think that if someone is willing to act a certain way towards their significant other in front of friends or family, and especially if there's multiple accounts of it, I think that the way that that person acts when nobody is watching is probably much worse. That's why I don't want anybody to think that I'm giving Charlie too much credit here, because I don't think that his behavior in particular is indicative of a bad day. I think that he was probably acting much worse towards her behind closed doors, but I'm explaining all of this for the sake of argument because I think that this is what both sides could argue and it could be a valid point. If this case ever went to trial and they were trying to use the accounts of the friends, this is an argument that they could make. The only thing that makes me question this entire thing and Charlie's involvement is the fact that police have not really found any evidence supporting his involvement. Did they test his hands for gunshot residue? Have they gotten information from his cell phone or car yet? If he's responsible, why isn't there really any evidence of it? The one thing I do want to mention though is that by the time police got there, they were cold and rigid according to the police report. That means that they most likely died the night before. So, if Charlie is honest in that he left at 10 p.m. that night and he came back and called police at 9 a.m. the next day, that's 11 hours that they could have been dead before police got to them. That's a lot of time for Charlie to clean himself up, maybe get rid of the gunshot residue on his hands, get rid of any bloody clothing or any other evidence on his body, get rid of footprints or anything else that can possibly point towards him. Am I saying for sure that he did this and that this is how it went down? No. I'm just saying that it's possible. Another thing that I think adds to this lack of evidence is that she lived with him in his home. His DNA is going to be all over all three of them, whether he's guilty or not, just by touching the same things as he has, from sitting on his couch and everything like that. So I don't think DNA evidence is going to be helpful in this case at all. And again, he had a lot of time to make things look a certain way. Again, I'm not saying that he did for sure, but if he wanted to, he certainly had the time to. But other than that, we are just left with speculation. We can't say one way or another, and I don't want to sit here and speculate too long or blame anybody for anything. Do I want to believe that a mother is capable of harming her children, especially after showing absolutely no signs of being an abusive or neglectful mother? No, of course I don't. But we also can't sit here and blame any one person with this lack of evidence. So that is where I'm going to leave this case.